Good evening. My name is Chase Robinson. I'm the interim president of the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and it is a great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event, the third in the series Music in 21st Century Society, the Lloyd Old and Constance Old Lectures, featuring one Philip Glass and Claire Chaise. As many of you will know, the Graduate Center is a school of arts and sciences. It's a center for applied and theoretical research, and it's a platform for performance, conversation, and public debate. As a community of students and scholars committed to the unconventional idea that learning is a public good, we regularly offer public programs featuring eminent thinkers, cultural leaders, and distinguished performers and artists addressing many of today's most pressing issues. To that end, we're presenting this year Cultural Capital, the Promise and Price of New York's Creative Economy, an entire year of institution-wide public programming devoted to the city's creative and knowledge-based industries. And as part of our focus on the creative economy, we're delighted to bring you this year's Music in 21st Century Society lecture, The Creative Pulse, featuring Philip Glass in conversation with Claire Chaise. This quite extraordinary lecture series is produced annually by the Graduate Center's Barry S. Brooks Center for Music Research and Documentation, which is so capably led by Barbara Dodds-McKenzie. And Barbara will say a few words and then introduce our speaker. But first, I'll say a few words about Barbara. Barbara is herself a distinguished musicologist. She's a faculty member here at the Graduate Center in our PhD program in music, and she serves on its executive committee. In addition to directing the Barry S. Brooks Center for Music Research and Documentation, she is editor-in-chief of the Répertoire International de Littérature Musicale, which publishes a comprehensive international bibliography of scholarly and other significant writings on music. In recognition of her great significance as a scholar, she was elected president of the International Association of Music Libraries, Archives, and Documentation Centers just recently for a 3-year term. So please help me in welcoming Barbara Dodds-McKenzie.
Thank you, Chase, and good evening, everyone. As Chase mentioned, I'm Barbara Dodds-McKenzie, and I'm director of the Brooks Center for Music Research and Documentation. And it is my great pleasure to join Chase in welcoming you all here for the third lecture of our annual series, Music in 21st Century Society. First, let me briefly introduce our center to you. The Brooks Center is a scholarly facility closely associated with the doctoral programs in music here at the Graduate Center. Its objectives are to provide a setting for wide-ranging research and documentation activities in music, and to disseminate the results of its activities to the scholarly community and the world at large through publications, conferences, exhibitions, and public events such as tonight's. Currently, there are 10 projects at the center, and you can read about them. There's a list on the back of the insert in your program. So I will just summarize it to say that the Brooks Center comprises projects that study Iberian music, musical life in New York City in the second half of the 19th century, French and Francophone musical cultures, the history of music as represented in art images, free reed instruments, the composer Yannis Tsanakis, and the lecture series, Music in 21st Century Society, of which tonight's event is the third. The Brooks Center also houses Realm Abstracts that Chase mentioned, which is the main online index to writings about music. Tonight, I am especially thrilled to announce the establishment of the Brooke Endowment for our center. This is brand new news. You're the first to hear it. It's established to help support all of these activities that I've mentioned and others far into the future, thanks to a generous bequest from Claire Brooke. Claire, who died last year, was not only the wife of the center's founder, Barry Brooke. She was also a prominent person in the musical world in her own right. Let me just mention two highlights of her career, one of them little known and one of them for which she was really well known. First, the little known fact, she was a composer, and she studied with Nadia Boulanger in Paris back in the day, and so did Philip Glass, and so many others, of course. Far more widely recognized and appreciated for many years, Claire ran the music department at W.W. Norton, and a number of seminal books and textbooks on music were published under her leadership. Her bequest has allowed us to establish the Brooke Endowment, helping to ensure the work of the center far into the future, and this explains the insert in your program. If you'd like to be a founding donor, and we hope you will be, have a look at that insert. Now on to tonight's main event. The Brooke Center series, Music in 21st Century, aims to present talks and debates by major cultural figures, addressing the changing consumption, creation, contexts, and valuations in today's society. The series is inspired and supported by Constance Old and her brother, the late Dr. Lloyd Old. For years, the Olds shared a passion and curiosity about the role of music in contemporary society, and this series is an outgrowth of that interest. Sadly, Dr. Old died in 2011, a few months before the series was inaugurated in April 2012 with Charles Rosen. The second lecture took place last spring with the eminent music writer and critic Paul Griffiths. And tonight, the third in the series presents the incomparable Philip Glass in conversation with another remarkable musician, Claire Chaise. I would like to thank our wonderful donor, Constance Old, who is here tonight and who makes this series possible. Please join me in thanking her for bringing this evening to us all. And I would especially like to thank Anthony Pizza, who, with the help of his assistant, Emmy Williamson, has curated all three events in our series, meaning he's done all the hard work behind the scenes to make these evenings so successful. So thank you so much, Anthony. This would not be happening without you either. And finally, we're very grateful for the help and support of the Public Programs Office and the excellent music department here at the Graduate Center, our partners in bringing this evening to you. Let me outline the way the evening will proceed, and then I'll introduce tonight's speakers. Philip Glass will talk to us tonight about the creative pulse in a conversational format with Claire Chaise. There will be a musical interlude during their talk in which Ms. Chaise will present a piece by Philip Glass for two flutes called Piece in the Shape of a Square. Note the square of music stands. It's from 1967. And then Ms. Chaise will moderate a question and answer session with the audience. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce our esteemed speakers this evening. Claire Chaise is an American flutist, arts entrepreneur, and a 2012 MacArthur Fellow. She's a soloist and a collaborative artist who has, over the decades, given world premieres for over 100 new works for flute, many of them written specifically for her. She has performed in the most prestigious halls all over the world. In addition, she has collaborated with many of the major composers of our day and is working on several large-scale solo performance projects designed for non-traditional spaces in collaboration with stage directors, filmmakers, visual artists, and choreographers. In 2001, she founded the International Contemporary Ensemble, described by the New York Times as one of the most adventurous and accomplished groups in new music. Mikhail Baryshnikov, writing in the Wall Street Journal, calls her a visionary, pure and simple. The Times writes that she has extravagant technique, broad stylistic range, and penetrating musicality. And the American Record Guide said, referring to her, "Look out, world, here comes a monster." We are indeed fortunate and thrilled to have her here at the Graduate Center with us this evening. Philip Glass, I believe I called him incomparable a few minutes ago. He hardly needs to be introduced, but let me say a few words about him to add to what you already know and what you have in your programs. An American composer, Philip Glass is among the most influential musicians of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. When you think of him, other composers that may come to mind are Steve Reich, Terry Riley, John Adams, and Arvo Pärt. But you might reasonably also think of a far more disparate group of composers and musicians, such as Ravi Shankar, Brian Eno, Laurie Anderson, Igor Stravinsky, Schubert, Bach, Mozart, David Bowie, Paul Simon, Linda Ronstadt, and Yo-Yo Ma. Philip Glass crosses a lot of boundaries, and not only musical ones. He also has collaborated with Twyla Tharp, Allen Ginsberg, Woody Allen, Chuck Close, and many others. He defines the term prolific, writing in the past 25 years some 20 operas, 10 symphonies, many concertos for piano, violin, timpani, saxophone quartet, film scores, of which three have been nominated for Academy Awards, string quartets, works for solo piano and organ, and much more. Here's an interesting fact I read about him just today. He grew up in Baltimore, and his father owned a record shop. See, I thought it was interesting too. And as I understand it, much of his early recording collection came out of the records that his father couldn't sell. And that was a lot of modern music and a lot of war horses of Western classical music. So you can imagine all of that in his ears as a young man and how influential that's been. I met Philip Glass at an event at the Armory a few years ago and told him about our lecture series, and he and his manager were immediately interested and responsive, and here he is tonight. His talk that night was fascinating, and I'm sure it will be again tonight. He's an extraordinary, creative, and innovative person, and we are delighted to welcome him to the stage. Philip Glass and Claire Chaise.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm totally delighted to be here with all of you tonight, and also totally honored to have this opportunity to speak with you, Philip. I've been an admirer of your work since my dad actually dusted off an old scratchy LP of music in 12 parts when I was, 13 or 14 years old, and I felt like I was discovering music for the first time.
I felt the same way.
So, as a fellow flute player, I have to open with a shamelessly flute-centric question first. That I don't know if anybody else will find this interesting, but this is something that I've been dying to ask you forever. So, as I understand it, in the Glass household, you were each allowed to play one instrument.
That's right.
Right? And even though you had a kind of under-the-radar romance with the piano, the flute was your
That's right. That's the
chosen
one I
instrument,
chose.
right? So, what was it about this piece of scrap metal?
I heard a fellow student, must have been 7 or 8, I was 6 or 7. 7, I was 7. He was a little older than me. He played the flute. And it was someone I met in school. And I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. And that's what I wanted to do. Now, in our family, you were only allowed one instrument. My mother was a school teacher, my father had a little music shop, but there wasn't money for a lot of lessons, but we were allowed one lesson. But I took the piano. I stole my brother's piano lessons. I would sit in the room when his teacher came, and when the teacher left, I would go and play the lesson. He would chase me around the room, and I wasn't supposed to do that, but I ended up playing the piano.
And you were pretty prodigious as a kid, right? I mean, you ended up going to college early to study philosophy and math.
I grew up in Baltimore at a time when Baltimore was not a cultural center the way it seems to be now. Baltimore was really a blue-collar town, the first northern city that had enough factories and things to attract a fairly large population. There was a good conservatory there, the Peabody. There was a couple art museums. There was a good symphony. There were some art schools. But it was, if you really wanted, let's say you wanted to see a movie with subtitles, you had to go to Washington. Actually, if you wanted to go to a Chinese restaurant, you had to go to Washington. That's what Baltimore was when I grew up there. So now, the young people, younger than you, they have a great romance with Baltimore now, and I find it interesting, but I didn't share it with them. So my dream was, how do I get out of Baltimore? And I managed to get out I figured out a way of getting out. So I did. I was gone by the time I was 15.
And you were in Chicago initially,
I went to
right?
Chicago, which was a big improvement.
Thank you. As a former Chicagoan, I appreciate the compliment.
It was a wonderful place for music. Fritz Reiner was the conductor of the Chicago Symphony at the time. Mm-hmm. He played lots of modern music. And in those days, I remember modern music would have been Bartók.
Imagine that.
1952. Wow. And he introduced these modern pieces there. So, but then I actually knew I was heading for New York, and I kind of made a detour because I had a way to get to Chicago. I didn't have a way to get to New York until I was about 18 or 19.
And when you were studying at the U of C, you were studying mainly math and philosophy, right? And playing music on the side?
I wasn't very good at that, actually. What I was also doing, they didn't have much, at that time, there was not a music department to speak of. There was some musicology that was taught there. But the composers like Easley Blackwood, who came later, was not there at the time. He was a former student of Nadia Boulanger, by the way. Right. So we ended up sharing a teacher. But so to study music, I had to go to the library and take scores out. I just did it on my own until I wasn't getting, I've had to get through Chicago first. By the time I got through Chicago, I was ready to go to New York.
And what was, you were like 15 to 18 years old. What was the music that you were obsessed with at the time? And what was...
Well, I thought modern music was Schoenberg. I thought modern music was actually written 50 years before. I thought, like everybody else, for the matter of fact, right. I thought modern music was Schoenberg and Webern and maybe Perez and Charles Ives was a little earlier even. I studied that music, and it wasn't that hard to understand the music. It was hard to make it sound good. If I wasn't skillful at that. I wasn't skillful at it very much at that time. By the time I got to New York, I was kind of over the European music. And I got interested in the jazz music. It was flourishing in New York at the time, right on the 5 spot. It's not too far from where I live now, on the Bowery and St. Mark's Place. You could hear Ornette Coleman and Thelonious Monk play every night.
Amazing.
It was amazing. You could go hear John Coltrane down at the Village Vanguard. You could hear everything. It was all here.
Well, and you've talked with Coleman about possibly doing a collaboration someday, right?
Anybody that would talk to me. And I never became a jazz composer, and I never felt I had the special skills that a jazz composer would need. So I didn't even flirt with it, but I loved it, so I listened to it. And what I worked on writing music, which I got to be, eventually I was able to do that. But I knew that I wasn't going to, so when I first came to New York, I called up Lenny Tristano. I had his phone number somehow. I wanted to study, I really knew about that music, and I knew partly from Chicago. Mm-hmm. That was another big hub for new music, for new jazz music.
Right. And if there was a piece of music from the repertory, from the classical repertory, Western tradition, that was deeply influential for you during that period, what was it?
I fell in with a bunch of other geeky kids like me, and we were very involved with Mahler and Bruckner. No one else knew what it was. We did.
Good adolescent strike music.
It took hours of time. And we studied the Furt Wangler's recordings and all kinds of things. We were very interested in this. But in terms of that, I really got interested in the roots of music with Bach, also with Boulanger.
Yeah. And you've said that Boulanger was your musical mother, and that Ravi Shankar, became your musical father, and that they somehow conspired spiritually to make the love child that is Philip Glass. Do you?
Well, I don't know if they would have admitted that. They didn't know each other, but they were very different. At one point, I felt that I had two angels on my shoulder, one on my right and one on my left, one who taught through fear and one through love.
Let me guess.
You don't have to guess very much about that. In the end, it amounted to the same thing. It didn't really matter. But they were both fierce teachers. And I was actually Rabbi Shankar's assistant. When I say study with him, he was a compulsive teacher, so anyone who was around him studied with him. He was constantly pulling musical tricks on you and playing the rhythms, and you had to play it back, and you talk to him, and he was constantly doing that. So I ended up writing music with him, and he became a real teacher for me. Though technically I was paid to work with him.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I suppose in that tradition too, you're a student for life. It's not as if you study for a period of time. You are signing up for
you think
hard work for
it stops
eternity.
when he dies? No, it doesn't stop there either. But through those two people, actually, I understood something which I had been thinking about, but not really knowing what it was. I understood the lineage of music. That music was a lineage, that you had a teacher who had a teacher who had a teacher who had a teacher. It goes back like that. It's pretty much, we can take classes of music, but the real, the deepest teaching is done one-on-one. Mm-hmm. Just like your flute teacher.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like my flute teacher. I was a flutist too.
Once a flutist, always a flutist.
We bonded immediately because of, but it was my first important relationship was with my flute teacher, but Boulanger, she studied with Fauré. Mm-hmm. Can you believe that? Mm. So I'm only one generation away from Fauré. I mean, it's astonishing.
That's amazing.
You know?
Yeah.
And then from there, you just leap back a couple hundred years. It's easy.
Well, people talk about their lessons with Boulanger as being like having a brain transplant because she was
it was like that.
Such a disciplinarian.
It was like an operation. Yeah. It was very intense. She gave me enough work to keep me busy. I used to start around 7 in the morning and I would finish at 7 at night. I mean, it was tons of counterpoint and ear training and analysis. It was all the stuff that I never really did at Juilliard because Juilliard wasn't that kind of school. It was a place where it was a very hard school to get into, but very easy to graduate from.
That sounds like a bumper sticker endorsement to me.
It was a very good school in many ways because they got really smart kids together, and you left them alone for 4 years, and they taught each other, kind of like that. And the teachers were busy; they had careers. They would look at the music, and they would do this and that. There were some good teachers there too, but the composing teachers were composing.
Right.
You know, so that wasn't. You didn't really. The kind of stuff I needed to know, I had to go to a real master of technique for that.
And with Boulanger, I mean, if you were to locate the most important piece of advice or the most essential lesson that she gave you, what would it be?
It makes me laugh when you say that. She was full of advice. She was constantly advising me, but. The thing that she said like a mantra over and over said, il faut faire un effort. You must make an effort. And she said that constantly. She made me feel lazy but she insisted on a level of commitment and stamina. And if you didn't have it, you got kicked out. She wasn't interested.
And did you come in with the practice of discipline that
I thought I knew everything. Of course, I knew nothing. The first thing she did, I went to her, I took about what I thought were my best pieces. I was a Juilliard graduate, had a master's degree, I had a bunch of stuff. Didn't matter what it was. I put her on the music rack of the piano, and she could speed read. She would go like that. She was reading like that. She went through 3 or 4 pieces, just kept going, and then finally she stopped. And she said, that measure there was written by a real composer. That's the only nice thing she said to me for the next few years. I think that's why I don't know why she allowed me in the class even, by the way. But it was common among her students to feel that you were the worst student there because you were basically, you were made to redo everything you knew. And so you just started all over again, and it had to be done very intensely. She knew I was going to hang around for too long. I was there I was into my third year, actually, when I finally decided I had to go. Well, actually, I was on my way to India. I went to India for that.
Well, because it was during that time that you also started to explore experimental theater and Mabou Mines and Berliner Ensemble.
We started a company in Paris. But I was working with theater companies when I was 20 in New York. When I was first at Juilliard, and by that time I was 20, I left Chicago when I was 19, but I had to go back and make some money to go to school. I did that for about 7 or 8 months, and I went up to New York. And I was ready to go, and I just went to Juilliard and said, I'm here. You know, I had no idea there were auditions. I didn't know anything. And they said, well, can we look at your music? And I said, well, and I knew that I couldn't show them what I had written. It was too juvenile. And I said, well, I'm going to be a composer. I haven't done it yet, but actually I was hiding things, which was probably better hidden. And they said, well, you can register and stay around for a year. In a year, we'll look at your music and we'll tell you whether you're going to stay or not. And of course, everybody I'm sure a lot of people thought that. I thought, oh, that's all I really wanted was a chance to do that. And a year later, I brought in about 12 new pieces. And I think they weighed them. And they said, this kid, we better let him in the school. It's just, you know, it must be OCD or something. But I wrote a lot of music that year. And I got used to writing music very quickly at that time. But as I say, it was a great environment to work in. But the real training was with Boulanger and with Raviji, the training.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me that this convergence of the Boulanger lineage and the discovery of Indian classical music with Shankar, and then also this very radical work with experimental theater companies.
Also we were working with Samuel Beckett.
Right.
At that time, that would have been the early 60s. He was writing pieces like Les Beaux Jours or Oh Happy Days.
Mm-hmm. And Play also, right?
Play was also, La Comédie was also, he worked in French and English, but he wrote in French. But we were a young company, we were in our 20s. And I don't know why he put up with us, but he was but you know, he wasn't that well known then. And we idolized him. But he wouldn't have anything to do with it. He picked one of us, and we communicated through one person, and we made, I think I did 8 scores for him during the time I was in Paris. And so I was working with him at that time. So we set our sights very high in terms of writing and in terms of performing. And then we got back to New York, almost immediately we went to La Mama. So I went from, and I had been working, that was in Paris, but I had been working at Juilliard with theater people. I asked myself, when I began at Juilliard, I asked myself a very important question, which I'm glad I did. I said, who wants my music? Who am I writing for? And I looked around and I said, there's the dance company. They were insatiable. They wanted music all the time. And the theater companies. So I began writing theater music and dance music right away. And they loved it. I mean, they wanted as much as I could do. I got actually paid a little bit from the theater company, but almost nothing from the dancers. It's hard to get paid from dancers. They don't have anything. It's impossible. But I have a long history with dance companies now and with theater companies. It goes all the way back to when I was 20. By the time I met Wilson and when I was 36, I'd been writing theater music for a long time.
Right. Well, and I imagine that Beckett's aesthetic and the removal of the subject from the narrative and playing with time in new ways was hugely influential for you as a young man, right? In shaping music in a different direction.
And in a way, the books of John Cage were fit right into that. And you can't remember that. You're too young. But in 1952, I think Silence was published. It might have been 1950.
Beautiful book.
52. When I had that book and The Year from Monday was the next book. We knew those books. We knew what they meant. We knew. I met him some years later, but by the time I met him, we absorbed that, and it was that was another part of our education. And John lived downtown, and it was easy to meet him. He was working down there, and he was very opinionated, but he was a very interesting fellow.
And you said that early in your in your life, maybe even as early as your adolescence, you were asking yourself this question, where does music come from? Which
You know about that.
It strikes me as similar to what you just said, you know, who's going to listen to my music? Who am I writing for?
Well, I got into very basic questions.
No, but it's an important question, and it's astonishing the number of musicians who don't ask themselves these questions. But you know, your answer to these larger philosophical questions about the function of music have changed a lot over the course of your life. And
It did, but they all involved my writing music.
right.
In other words, the reason I began writing music was I thought, well, that would be one way to find out where music came from. It seems like a good idea. I mean, if you wanted to know where milk came from, you'd hang out with the cows, right? So it was a little bit like that, except the connection was a little more obscure. So I began writing music, and I never found the answer from that. That was the wrong. I realized maybe 20 years later, I was asking the wrong question. And so then I began thinking, well, what is music? That's a different question. Mm-hmm. And then I got into the usual answer, was that it's a form of language. And then from my point of view, it would have been the most sophisticated language that, and we share it. It's not unique to humans. Animals have it, mm-hmm. and fish have it. Some fish have it. Some sea animals have it. These questions have been going on for a good 60 years. So I don't know if I've gotten anywhere with it.
Well, more recently, you said that music, I thought this was so beautiful, that music is a place.
Well, I was in a talk like something like this, but it was a younger group of people, from what I can tell, that I expected to see a much
What are
more
you saying about them?
Oh, I don't know. They're about my age. No, you're younger. It's okay. But I was talking to a group of, I'd never taught in a school, but when I played in a school, I was asked to teach, to speak, like we're doing now. And someone said, Mr. Chaise, we've gotten to this question, what is music? And I said, well, I went through where it comes from. And then I said, and it's very spontaneous, I said, actually music is a place. It's as real as Chicago or St. Louis. It's a completely real place. And a musician lives his life with one foot in this world and one foot in the other world. Would you agree with that?
I think it's a beautiful, beautiful way of describing something that is essentially indescribable.
It has the feeling, to those of us who who don't even make the journey, who live in that way, once you see it that way, it tells you a lot. Now, I've been pursuing this idea a little bit. Place and space are almost the same word, right? Now, it occurs to me that is place a special case of space? Well, we don't have to talk about that tonight if you don't want to, but it's a very interesting question, because once you talk about space, once you talk about place, you start thinking, what are the properties of space that make it interesting? Mm-hmm. And then it becomes about space.
Well, and this is...
And that leads, the question goes a little bit further then.
Ah.
But that's about as far as I got.
Well, I think an artist like Richard Serra, with whom you also have a
we
long,
worked together a long
important
time.
history, would agree with that in terms of sculpture.
Yeah, I guess it would. I'm trying to think. I should tell the audience. I didn't make a living at music until I was 41, so I had day jobs. And one of my day jobs, one of the best ones, was working for a friend who hired me because he needed help. He was a sculptor, Richard Serra, and he had just gotten. I came back from Paris. We met in Europe. He got back here before me, and I came back, and the first couple of years I was moving furniture was with his truck. He didn't need the truck anymore because he was at the Leo Castelli Gallery. Mm-hmm. And then he called me one day to say, look, I need some help. Can you come down and work for me? By that time, I had moved on to other kind of work. And I said, Richard, I make $200 a week now. I don't think you can afford me. It was 1972. And that was a lot of money then.
But he ponied up, right?
Oh, he said, no problem. And he said, no, I had to put up a show for Leo. And what had happened, you see, in exchange for the truck, I was starting to help him in the evenings move things around. So he got used to having me around the studio. And what he liked about me was I wasn't a sculptor. So I looked at all this. I loved what he did, but I had no interest in stealing his ideas. I mean, I wouldn't have known what to do with them. I was completely innocent of any ambition in the world of the plastic arts, so that he felt very comfortable with me. I think I was his probably favorite, at least until then, his favorite for a while, his favorite assistant. But he quickly discovered that I didn't know enough about art to be that. So part of the time we spent together, he spent educating me about art. Did you hear this part of the story?
Yeah.
He would send me out to the museums and I had to take books home. We had to discuss the frame of a painting or the pedestal of a sculpture. We had to discuss all the things about what art was about and what that was about. And it was very similar. And I was working in a very similar way that he was working. At that point, I was working, I had condensed a lot of what I had learned from Ravi Shankar into an interesting system of structures. And it was a kind of a process structure, a structure that was based on process. And he was working in process with materials. Only difference between him and me was he was working with materials that he found in the street, and I was working with sounds, and with almost, I wouldn't say mathematical ideas, but it was related to arithmetic in certain ways.
Right, and just additive rhythms and...
Additive and subtractive, and I discovered things which, that there were closed systems and open systems. There were systems that turned inside themselves and systems that could go on into infinity. I had all kinds of interesting ideas, which I've forgotten most of that by. This piece is a circular piece. You probably have noticed.
Yes.
Have you been tempted to go around a second time?
I have done it on many occasions. This is the piece in the shape of a square, which we'll be playing shortly. Piece from 1967, which is from your period of pure minimalism, right? I mean, you.
Well, that was a true period of minimalism. It lasted until around 1974.
Yeah.
And after that, I didn't do it anymore. But people kept writing about it as a problem. But the only trouble was that if you listen to an opera like Orphée, it doesn't sound like a minimalist opera at all. So this can sound that way. But I've written solo music recently for cello and for violin. It doesn't sound like this. And yet people will say that it doesn't matter.
Well, before we jump to Piece in the Shape of a Square, I just wanted to pick on something that you said about Sarah's influence on you, and also in the context of your fascination with experimental theater in Europe, and then again in New York with La Mama and everything else. Did these two formative experiences for you funnel into your collaborative aesthetic and your desire to work beyond opera, not only with new...
No, I think I learned about collaboration by working in the theater itself. And I learned about collaborations with working with dance itself. That didn't come up with Ravi, or it didn't come up with Ravi or with Nadia Boulanger. It wouldn't have come up. We were really, basically what she was doing, if I had gone to study carpentry, she would have been giving me tools. I would have left there with a shiny saw and a beautiful hammer, and the tools would have been perfect. And what she gave you was tools. The material of music that was my problem. Her problem was to give me the right tools, and that's what she focused on. And I can say that is truly what it was. With Ravi, it was somewhat different because, first of all, he had to introduce the whole idea of the structure of Indian music to me, which I didn't know about. So he didn't mind doing it. He liked to talk about music. In fact, he never stopped talking about music. We talked about rhythmic structure, and that fit in a surprising way with the work I was doing with Beckett. Because I was starting to work, Beckett was working, of course, in a non-narrative form, as were a number of people at that time. And with when I was working with the structure of Indian music, it's very much like a Jasper Johns painting, where the frame of the painting is hard. It can't find the frame because the painting is, the outside and the inside of the painting are the same. In other words, the titles of these pieces, for example, I did pieces I called Music in Still Motion, Music in Fifths, pieces. The titles are descriptions of the object, but the object is actually the surface of the piece. So that the structure of the piece, I'll put it this way, it's the excuse the composer has to write the piece. So when I wrote a piece in similar motion, I had to figure, well, I knew what similar motion was, and how would the music be? Mm-hmm. So that's when I talk about process, it became very much like a non-narrative form. It was a non-narrative form. And so the relationship between the visual arts and what I was doing, and we knew Jasper's work very well, as I knew Frank Stella's work, and I knew Sola Witt's work, I knew all these guys very well. And I understood right away that Richard and I were, the generation that came, we learned it from them, so to speak. They were able to crystallize the argument, but we were the beneficiaries of it by far. But not that they were great artists. I don't know if we ever came close to them, but when you look at the painting, the American flag painting that's a good example. Are you looking at the painting of a flag, or are you looking at a flag? It's impossible to say. In the same way that by doing it this way, the structure of the piece became the content of the piece. You know, we talk about form and content. Mm-hmm. This is a way of making them into one. The form and content became identical. That's a tremendous. It's an intellectual feat to do that, and to do it in your art form becomes something that keeps you very busy for a while. Mm-hmm. The conflating of form and content, so that they become identical, that you can't even separate them. So I began calling pieces like 2 pages. It was just 2 pages of music, but it was another way of describing it. This piece that you're going to play any minute, as soon as I stop talking, maybe, it's a pun on a piece by Sartre called Musique en forme de pois, music in the form of a pear. So I called it music in the form of a square. But I didn't, you can't translate it. Music en forme de carré doesn't work, but music in the shape of a square works, because it's music in the shape of a pear, a square. So, I have to explain this. No one ever gets the point of its title. But anyway, that's what it is. So then I said, well, if that's the title, what is the piece? The piece has to be what the title is. And so I set up the music, and I made a square. There's, by the way, what Claire isn't showing you, because she's going to play, there are 2 parts. You recorded the other part, right?
That's right, yeah.
The square is actually a little bit bigger, because there would be someone inside the square and someone outside the square. And I was one of the flutists, and my friend John Gibson was the other flutist when I did it. And I walked to the right. Of course, he was inside, and he walked to the left. And we crossed back there, and then we came back together. We had to come back at the same time to the same place. So we needed more room than that.
Well, this is the
Do you do a larger
solipsistic version of it. And the good news and the bad news is that the recorded flute part, which is me, is rhythmically perfect. That's the good news, and that's also the bad news, because
that's right.
There's a human being that has to interact with that. It's slightly more of a high wire act than if there's 2 human beings, but it's great fun.
When John and I were playing that piece, I would say we rarely did it perfectly. We had to get out of sync, And so those carefully arranged ascending and descending lines were probably not heard the way I wrote them. But then again, I was having enough trouble playing my part. I was hoping that John was doing better than me. He probably was. And if I saw if we turned the corner at the same time, I thought that was good enough. We could end up kind of in the middle. We usually did.
Well, speaking of visual artists, I mean, the piece was performed in a gallery, right, or at Anthology Film Archives, or one of those.
It was at the Anthology Archives that Jonas Mekas had. It was a film place. Right. And I met Jonas when I first came to New York at a party, and he's a very nice man. He's still around. He's in his 90s now. He runs a music film anthology on 2nd Avenue and 2nd Street right now. And When I met him, I'd just come back from Paris, and he said, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm a composer. Can I?" And I understand you have this space. Can I do a concert there? And he smiled and said, "Yes." Didn't ask what I did. Didn't want to hear anything. He just said, "Yes."
And so you tacked up music to the walls, or how did you do it?
I did all kinds of things, but that was one. There was another piece called Strung Out, which was a violin piece that was on the wall and then took a right turn out. So when you came into this concert, you had all these shapes. It was quite lovely, actually. I did a piece for John, a solo saxophone piece, which was one long line and one small line. And it didn't have a verbal expression, so the name of the piece was The Shape of the Piece. I just said that was the name of the piece. It was just like, so I just...
Well, you know, much like your description of the American flag, that it's about the subject revealing itself, not developing, right? I mean, this piece, it really is, the piece develops not because it develops in a traditional Beethoven sense, but it develops because the same idea is revealed, you know, the way that it was in the American flag painting. I mean, and as a performer, I have a similar experience. There are very few pieces of music where I have a similar experience listening and performing, but when I listen to this music, I have almost an identical experience. That when I'm performing it, I end up in a kind of meditative state because you have to. And
well, you have to pay attention.
Right.
And if a meditation is paying attention, that's good enough.
Right. Well, let's hear it, and then we'll continue chatting.
You play it. I'm going to go sit over there.
All right.
How do you do that? Practiced.
Yes.
It
Effort.
beautiful,
Boulanger's
beautiful.
advice, effort.
Beautiful playing.
Well,
Thank you.
it's a wonderful piece, and it's terrifying to play, but it's also a total gas to play.
It's like trying to climb a wall without anything to hang on to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of.
Well, before we open this up, I know that folks are probably dying to ask questions, but I have a couple other things I'm also dying to ask you while I still have your undivided attention.
Okay.
So, on the subject of collaboration, which obviously is a huge part of your output, it's interesting to me that we have all kinds of ways of teaching all kinds of complex things. We can teach counterpoint, we can teach somebody how to play a violin, we can teach just about anything. We have not figured out how to teach collaboration, and yet I think that we all agree that collaboration and the dissolution of lines between disciplines is very much where art and performance is going in the latter half of the 20th century, first part of the 21st century, right? But we don't really have a pedagogy, we don't have a practice for talking about it and what makes it work. And as somebody who has had collaboration at the absolute core of everything you've done, and I wonder if there is, not that I'm looking for an easy answer, but I wonder if there are some
A couple
key things that make a collaboration really excellent.
When I was working for Richard, at one point I was there with him for 3 years. I was writing music at the same time. And not exactly at the same time, but after working with him, I would write music, and I was touring, I was doing all that. And one day I said, Richard, I can't draw at all. I can't even draw a cat or a tree. And he said, I can teach you to draw. I said, really? How would you do that? He said, well, I'll teach you to see, and then you would know how to draw. I said, oh, it was like a revelation. I thought immediately then that painting is about seeing, dancing is about moving, poetry is about speaking, music is about listening. What I tell the first lesson in music and the last lesson is to listen. When we play as a performer, that's why I think composers should be performers. When we perform, then we have to listen in a special way. And it's through the activity of listening that we begin to understand it. Now, okay, so that's one part of it. So when you do that, when you're working that way, and let's say you're working with Bob Wilson, he'll do designs and staging. Cindy Charles will do the movement. Bob will also do besides do the, so that there's text. Text was done by Christopher Knowles and other people. So that comes down to text, movement, music, and
Design.
what?
Design.
I'm trying to think the right, but I think it is just text, music, movement, and image. I was trying to think of the best word. I think image is the best word.
Yeah.
I think text, music, image. So that becomes like the air, earth, fire, and water. All collaboration comes from that. That little comment of Richard's got me going. When I work with people, I know what they're living in the world of movement, they're living in the world of text, they're living in the world of music, the world of image. What we have to do, and the only way that it works, is that the collaborators trust each other. Trust becomes I think the core of the relationship. As soon as someone, in a real collaboration, you don't tell the other person what to do. Basically, if you leave them alone, they'll do their best work.
Well, and also, don't you think it's true that beginning with everybody in the same room,
Hopefully.
beginning from the beginning of
it's hard to
of
do
an
that
idea,
in some. Yes.
not the way that opera houses work, not the way that traditional theaters work.
We can do it with dance and theater. We can do it. It's very hard to do it in film because the rules of filmmaking relegate the music to the end of the line. Right. With Godfrey Reggio, who did the Cazzi movies, I've made movies with filmmakers a number of times where the image and the music was made at the same time. In fact, sometimes the music preceded the image. A film called Poakatsi was filmed in the opening scene of the gold mines, open pit gold mines in Brazil. And I had gotten some images that Cousteau had made a film about that place. And I looked at it, and I wrote a 10-minute piece. And I went down, and we had the cinematographer listen to the music while he was filming. And then the guys in the mines, they wanted to know what we were doing. And I could speak some Portuguese. I had gone there for a while. I said, "Okay, posso fazer aqui? What are you doing here?" I said, "Nós vamos a música por aqui. We're making the music for here." And they say, "Pode ouvir? Can I hear it?" I said, "Sí." And I put it on their heads. And the guys in the movie, not all of them, but some of them, actually listened to the music. Amazing. So I wanted to shift it completely around, to let the music be, because I felt the music had a particular, especially in film, and that's true in often a lot of collaborative things, the music can articulate the structure in time better than anything else can. That's one thing. The other thing, I'll offer an experiment. If we've all done this where there's a movie on and you play different music to the movie. You notice how the movie changes. Well, try to reverse that. Try to listen to the same music. Try to keep the music the same and change the same images. Change the images you're looking at. The music doesn't change. Doesn't change. So that tells us something. It tells us that the modality of perception has more to do with the music than with the image. Astonishing idea in Hollywood. They simply don't believe it's true, but they know it's true.
But scientifically, it's not an astonishing idea at all, because of course we hear so many times faster than we perceive through our other senses, through smell, through touch, through sight. We think of, especially our culture, as this very fast visual culture.
Okay.
But we're hearing and we're absorbing sound and understanding the world through those synapses at a rate that makes sight and smell and touch and the other senses total slowpokes.
And what you're saying actually would guide us in the collaboration. For example, if I'm doing a dance piece, the first thing I do is I want to see the company. Oh, are they big? Are they small? What kind of shoes are they wearing? That tells me a lot. I want to see the costume designer. I want to see the lights. If I'm working on a play, I go to the costume fittings. I go to everything. If with a movie, I almost always am on the set at one point. Now that's very few composers actually do that. I actually want to know what we're doing from top to bottom. By doing that, it's not that I'm learning these things specific, but by entering that world to some degree, strictly almost like a tourist, but still I've entered it. And if I'm doing a play of Shakespeare, I'll go to all the rehearsals, I'll listen to there are always songs in Shakespeare plays. I've got to write at least 2 songs in every play. By the time we get around to putting the music in, I know the actors already. I know the parts that have been left out. I know everything. So my advice to composers is, because no one else asked me anything, but a composer might ask me, he said, "How do you work in film?" I said, "Go to the editing room. Sit with the editor." When I was doing Kundun with Scorsese, that was a film about the Dalai Lama, he was in the editing room every day. Well, it was not too far. I could take the subway up there. And the editing was going on, and I stayed. I spent hours, and I had actually written the music already. I had convinced him to let me write the music from the script, which he had never heard about before. He said, "Well, how do you do that?" I said, "Look, Marty, there are 100 pages of the script. The piece is 100 minutes long. You give me a 3-page scene, I'm going to write 3 minutes of music. I'm not going to be very far off. Yeah, we can fix it later. It doesn't matter. And he finally, it was the first time I had done this with Godfrey a lot, but that was the first industry filmmaker that ever let me do that, and probably the only one that ever did, actually. Because when I saw him to talk about this, I knew something about the subject matter, and I said, I knew him anyway, so we had worked on something else, and I said, I have to talk to you about, I hear you're doing a film about the Dalai Lama, I got to talk to you. He said, okay, come on. I said, Marty, I got to do this film. He said, what? What's up? I said, well, you're doing a film about a place that no longer exists. It's now an imaginary place. Tibet that you're filming, you can't even find it anymore. You can find it in pictures. So that not only will an audience like us see it, well, not only would it be foreign to us, it would be beyond exotic, it would be unimaginable. So the music has to be what carries you to the image. And I will do it that way. And he said, well, how will you do that? I said, well, I live downtown, and there's a friend of mine on Fifth Street, another friend, he's from Bhutan, he plays the longhorns, another plays the drums. I'll get him in the studio, we'll start with that. I'm going to make some tapes with them, I'm going to start adding instruments to it, and I'll build it up that way. And he said, well, that's fine, okay, good, we'll do it. And I said, so we got to spot that. Now, spotting a movie means where do you put it into the picture? I'm sorry the answer is so long, but I'll get to the point in a second. And he said, well, we'll do it. I'm going to shoot it. I'll be back in January. We'll do it then. I said, no, Marty, you've got to do it now. He said, what do you want to do it now? He says, I'm going to write the music and I'm going to send to you. And I know he does every day, he takes the dailies and cuts them together. I said, you can start cutting the picture to the music, and that's what he did. We got to the point where we got to the real number 6, which is the escape to India, about 22 minutes, a very long cue. He wanted one cue, which, by the way, he needed to get a special sprocket for it because it was so long. It was about 18 minutes, and this had to be 22. He got an extra size one, so that there wouldn't be any cut in the music. And I was on tour, and I hadn't finished the 6th reel. And he called and said, where's the music? He said, he said, I can't edit it without the music. I totally twisted his head around.
What a triumph.
Well, it was for that one movie. It never happened again. But we did the whole movie that way.
That's amazing.
Thelma Schumacher was the editor, and he was playing it I said, play the music for the actors before you shoot the scene. And they were all Tibetan guys. And they recognized the music.
Yeah. They
knew where it was from. And they knew at least half of the music. And I added another half. They didn't know what that was, but it was grounded in the world that they knew. And same thing with the guys in Brazil. When I came back with that music, it's the same process. And the Brazilian guys, I mean, it didn't change how they still had to haul the bags of dirt up to the top, and that's how they did it. So that was those collaborations become very deep, but they don't become. You get involved with it, but I never told, when I was working with Susan Marshall, I never told her what to do in choreography, or with Lucinda, I would never dream of saying, I want you to do this. I don't do that. This is in music, and then I would go to all the rehearsals. Sometimes I played the rehearsals. With Einstein, I was the rehearsal pianist for about 5 or 6 months. So I played everything with everybody.
I would imagine that simply being there, being a presence there as the work is taking shape, is in itself a form of collaboration that a lot of traditional systems, the way that work is developed, don't allow for. And I think that's the problem. That's the problem. Hollywood is like that.
It's simply not. The studios don't work that way. So I can do it the other way too, but it's not as much fun. And the fact is that for images and music to be really joined together, they have to come together at the same time.
Right.
You have to be in the room when they're editing. You have to. Now, everything else is it's just talk. The work is doing. The work isn't talking or figuring it out or imagining it. It means seeing what the actors do, reading the script, going to everything. Right. And amazingly funny things happen. But there are a lot of funny stories. But let's go on. What was the other question?
I think we should open this up for questions from our young public. Yes. Yes, sir. There are actually some microphones here if you would like to have your voice broadcast.
There is a picture of you, Philip, in Rockefeller University, and it's a picture of you looking towards the front, and anybody who walks over there sort of experience some sort of transformation. I don't know if it's musical transformation, but it's something that reminds me of a movie. Tell me if I take so long, because everything is doing a hurry in this country. So just tell me and I shut up. There is a movie called The Spirit of the Beehive, El Espíritu de la Colmena, by a Spanish director, and he has the eyes of, in a family content that worked for the dictatorship that was during the Franco era. And I was comparing that kind of experience of the Spirit of the Beehive with the experience of Ubera Image in Rockefeller University. And reading and listening to this great presentation, a great experience, it comes to my mind, what's going to happen to our music and to the legacy of our music? It's in the process of transformation. It's very hard for us because we are at the very top of the financial world with all the crises in the world. And it seems that the music that we seem to remember is the pop music from the 50s and the 60s, and deep-bearing artists, Hendrix, very political, connected. This is a silly question. How are we going to evolve?
My music is still changing. And I'm having big problems with my copyists now because they're telling me that notes are wrong because of, but I'm writing a lot of wrong notes now, but they aren't wrong. It's that the music is changing. And people who know me really well think they know the music, and I have to fight with them. I said, no. A very good, Dennis Davis was a wonderful conductor. And we were doing a new symphony, we were in Austria, and he was looking, and he said, Philip, that horn note can't be it can't be a G, it's got to be an A. I said, Dennis, it's a G. He said, nope, it's got to be an A. I said, Dennis, play the G. No, we've been in the music world too long. We can't prove it through theory. Theory is not going to help. Because he has one theory, I can come up with another one. So we both know that. So he says, I said, play the G. So we go into the rehearsal. He starts to play. We get to that horn place. He looks over at me. The horn plays the G, and he looks at me, and I go, yes. And he gives me a big smile. So the thing is that even then when we're doing it, we may, especially when you talk about changing, the thing about changing is that, and in a funny way, the real fun of writing music is to get to that place where you don't know what you're doing. Or rather, it's not that you don't know what you're doing, you can't explain what you're doing. That's different. You can know what you're doing, but you can't exactly explain it. It's too new in a way. I didn't have to do that with Einstein, because when I wrote Einstein, no one thought it was anything. Most people didn't think it was anything anyway, so I didn't have to explain it. And the people who liked it didn't need the explanation. So I never explained what it was. Later on, it wasn't interesting. There were interesting ideas in there, but they were never talked about. When I'm doing a piece now, when I find myself in that place where I don't know what to do, and I have a little boy who's 11 years old who writes music, And he says, Daddy, I'm having problems with my music now. I said, what's that? He said, well, I write the themes, but I don't know what to do next. I said, aha, the what to do next problem. That's the real problem. He said, you're really writing music now. You came to that problem. He said, well, what do I do? I said, well, that's what it is. You have to figure out what comes next. What?
Absolutely. I'm also reminded of one of my favorite quotes from your pal Beckett when he said, "Ever tried, ever failed, try again, fail better." And if that doesn't describe the experience of life and the experience of art, I don't know what does. It's just as cynical as it is idealistic and wonderful.
Now, this comes up to the question of collaboration, and we can now tie your question to the thing we were talking about. What I discovered in collaborating was that if I changed my collaborators with every piece, I was usually in a new situation. If I worked with the same ones, we did the same piece. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I would keep one person, just kind of like a security blanket. So I maybe keep the costume designer or the lighting person or the writer. But the other 3 or 4, they were always people I didn't know. Then I would put them in the room, we look at the piece, and for sure, I was doing something I hadn't done before. Now, in other words, collaboration becomes an engine of change. The encounter with another artist, when you allow the encounter to be fully, realized, fully experienced, and you say, don't do that, or said, oh, now what do I do? And and then we're no longer, the tools we learn from our teachers are still good, but the designs are different. The doors don't look the same. The windowsills are different. But once you have decided, the good thing about having tools, which is what technique is, flutists have it, pianists have it, composers have it, dancers have it. Whatever you do, you got tools. If you're a baker or a designer or a clothes maker, whatever you do, you have tools. Whatever those tools are, that's your technique. That's not the piece, but without the technique, the piece is not going to sound right, it's not going to taste good, it's not going to feel right. A good set of tools are really invaluable, and that's what we get when we're young, if we're lucky. If we don't get it when we're young, we have to get it later. We have to get it sometime. But in that situation where, what happens now with a collaborator? I've done about 6 pieces with Bob Wilson, but over a period of 40 or 50 years, So that meant I didn't work with, there will be 8 or 10 years between collaborations. And that was long enough. Then when he came back, or I came back, we weren't the same people. Bob was doing something different. And it was really interesting. But
earlier today you said music is about listening. But this piece is not only about listening, but it's also about the visual aspect of it, the shape, and the fact that the performer moves around the shape. I frequently get enthralled by movie music, but then it's not so much the film that gets to be important, it's the music itself. So I want to buy the recording of the music, and the film fades. If I like this piece so much that I want to purchase the recording of it, I'll have the recording, but I won't have the visual. I won't have the aspect of what you're doing. And to me, once I purchase the music, and because I want to listen to the music, seeing it becomes virtually, I hate to use the term, irrelevant.
Well,
and so I don't care about what I see, I care about what I hear. And you guys basically said more or less the same thing. Music is about listening, not about seeing.
Thankfully, because of your perceptions and many people like you, live performance is alive and well. I'm paying more conscious now than I ever did before. It's because you're not going to see, the most fundamental experiences will happen through the encounter with the live performance. to see Claire actually walking around, and we had someone said talking about how she looked when she walked around. We even, it's frustrating because we try to capture that on film, and it's very hard to do. Fortunately, because one of the ways that musicians can still make a living is by playing. Our copyrights have been rated and streamed, and all kinds of things like that going on, and our contributions to the commercial world have been devalued to the point where it isn't hardly worth doing at all anymore. But we can still play.
Yeah, but I want to hear it. I want to hear it in my
Yeah,
car.
you want to hear it live, and you want to be there. Even if you've heard the piece before, you'll spend $25, $30, $40 to go see someone do it live. Thankfully, and that's what has saved the music world, really. It's the ordinary, or rather, say, the universal appetite for the encounter with a live performer. And that's how we make a living.
Yeah, and I
Otherwise,
don't
we
think
wouldn't
that
be able to manage.
we're ever going to stop needing that,
I think you're right.
It's as essential as the desire to be told a story.
Yeah, but for
It's the most essential human need.
for a long while, we tried to make perfect records as if that was going to do something for us, but it doesn't.
It just increases the demand for the ephemeral experience, I think. So we are out of time. I'm so sorry we didn't get all the questions. I have one very short closing question to ask you. What is it that most excites you about music, about the future of music? If there's one kernel, one thing that gives you great idealism, what is it?
One of the things that we see right now is there's all the technology and there's all the non-technology. The technology isn't very much in your performance because, you make the flute sound bigger, but if we were in a smaller room, we wouldn't need it. What's interesting to me is that we're at an interesting place where we're going to have to understand technology in a different way. It's not going to just be about making things loud or making things quicker or making things running, but it's about the way we think. This is a much longer answer, but when I began working with Indian music, I was beginning to work with a binary language. I didn't discover a binary language in the Western world for another 30 years. That's a binary language, everything you're playing. You know that from playing it. Binary language is ones and zeros.
On that note, thank you all so very much. Thank you for